see him? Welcome to the meeting, Representative Sawyer. Yeah, we'll call the committee to order. First on the agenda, consideration of approval of minutes. Do I have a motion on the minutes or any changes, questions on the minutes? Seeing none, I have a move to approve by Senator Wilburn, seconded by Majority Leader Hawkins. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Minutes are approved. 2 on my agenda, appointment of committee members and chairperson, vice chairperson of the Legislative Budget Committee. For that, I've got JG.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Legislative Budget Committee is a 7-member committee that's appointed by the LCC. Historically, there's been 4 House members, 3 Senate members. The appointment terms end on the first day of session in the odd number years. So it would be for 2 years. Preferences are to be given to members of the Ways and Means Committee on the Senate and the Committee on Appropriations of the House. The LCC appoints the chair and vice chair, and last year it was chaired by the Senate.
So I have by record, so what I have here on my agenda proposed is Reps Waymaster, Hoffman, Wolfmore, and Johnson. Senators Billinger, Clays, and Hawkins, with Waymaster as chair. Not Hawkins. I've got Hawkins right here. So, with no N, right? And Billinger is the vice chair, Waymaster is chair. So just take the vote action. All right, then I'll take that. That's the recommendation. I have a movement on a recommendation. Recommended by Speaker Reichman. Do you have any comment? Seconded by Senator Wilburn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Vote passes. Third on the agenda, appointments to the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, Oversight Committee, and the Electronic Recording Commission. Again, JG.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a vacancy. The chair of the Healthcare Stabilization Fund Oversight Committee is open. The former chair had resigned. It's an 11-member committee. 6 members are appointed by the LCC, one of which is the chairman, and that's the vacant position that we have right now. And they receive information provided from an actuarial review of the Healthcare Stabilization Fund.
Very good committee. Is that?
There is another, if you want me to go over it real quick.
Yes, go ahead and go over both.
Okay. The other position that is vacant is on the Electronic Recording Commission. This was created in 2006. It's a 15-member commission. 5 members are appointed by the LCC. There is one member that is retiring, and that is a representative of the oil and gas industry. The commission is to keep the standards and practices of the Register of Deeds consistent with the other entities that are recording the information as well. So it keeps the data standards, the security, signatures, notary acknowledgement, file formats and such consistent so that they all work together.
Okay, committee, questions, comment. Senator Wilburn, I have by recommendation, a Tyler Turner by recommendation and Marvin Klebb become the chair. Is there comments or questions on any of that? Seeing none, Senator Wilburn.
If it pleases the body, move that we adopt the appointments recommended by the chair. I'll combine motion.
I have a motion.
Turner as member of the Electronic Recording Commission, Marvin Klebb as chair of the Oversight.
Very good. So I have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Senator Hawkins. Representative Hawkins. You're killing me. So, discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. So 4 on the agenda, we had conversations around the return of the meditation room in the Capitol. We have the authority to make those spaces. The Senate did have a proposal for the House's review that was discussed also with the governor's office. Appeared to have consensus, but I'd like to have discussion around that. The proposal's in your packet. In essence, we reclaim the media green room, the meditation room. The House takes control of some of the offices that are directly under the Speaker's office, and then the Senate gains access to some rooms that are currently under the state library's control, and then the three members of the library board will move out of the Capitol to another building that's acceptable. So that was the proposal from the Senate. Have any questions or comment on that? The goal would be to retain the media room and the mediation and the meditation room. Speaker Reitman.
Thank you, President. Appreciate the offer. We would like a chance to look at the rooms. I know we saw this late yesterday, especially to see what rooms that the House is giving up and see what ones we're getting. Also would like to see, I think when it says the Senate Library going somewhere, we're kind of like to know where. I know before that was like a $30,000 yearly expense. So I want to make sure that's been cleaned up. Maybe you have an answer to that now, but.
I do. The 30,000 was in the omnibus budget that allowed for that, and, paying to ourselves to reclaim. And speaking from the offices given up, the House would actually, the members that are in what is now kind of the governor's hall on the second floor would actually gain space that we have access to, which would give them kind of offices of their own and kind of upgrade in space, if you will.
So we look forward to just looking at them and hopefully take action at our next meeting.
Okay, I do think, given some of I was intending to take action, but I think with what's on our agenda as it pertains to the disaster, it may require us to meet on Friday. So we'll hold and wait for that discussion to see if we look like we need to regain a meeting on Friday, we'll take that up then. So number 5, consideration and approval of the number of House and Senate journals to be printed, pricing for sale of the journals. So for that, I'm going to call on our secretary, Corey Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is on the printing of the 2021 Senate and House permanent journals. Each year, the LCC sets both the price of the permanent journals and the total number printed as required by statute. This year, and as detailed in the memo you have in front of you, the chief clerk and I are recommending 150 sets be printed at a cost of $80 per set. This is a number that we found to work well with or for the legislative branch and for the Secretary of State's office who distributes the permanent journals. And so if the LCC would like to move forward with the printing, we'd simply need a motion and a second then to adopt those two numbers, the 150 sets at $80 per set. And I'd be glad to stand for any questions.
My question, Susan, are you seconding his motion? You have any? All right. Yeah. So committee, do we have a motion on that? Senator Wilburn?
Yes, I move the LCC authorizes the printing of 150 sets of House and Senate journals.
I have a motion, there's a second by Representative Finch. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. Final thing on the agenda is consideration and possible extension of the state disaster. And I think for that we have Gordon and Clay. I'm not sure who we want. Gordon, why don't you take it off?
Mr. Chairperson. The current state of disaster emergency will expire on May 28. There's a provision in Senate Bill number 40, which is in KSA 48924, B5, that provides that when the legislature is not in session, that upon specific application by the governor, the LCC may extend the state of disaster for a period of not to exceed 30 days. In your packet, there's a letter from the governor that makes the application as required pursuant to statute to the LCC for this extension in the letter through June 27, 2021. I will leave it to the Clay to go over the details, but suffice it to say the letter outlines some of the disaster emergency response questions that are going on. It also provides that with reference to certain EOs and their what happens with them, and whether they will be continued and rescinded and into the future as to what she might be proposing. And so this, in order to extend at this point, this is the procedure that the LCC must follow pursuant to statute.
Very good. So I'll call on Mr. Brittton to follow up on that request. Welcome to committee.
There are we going now? Thank you, Mr. Chair and Council. I'm Clay Brittton. I'm the Governor's Chief Legal Counsel. As Gordon mentioned, I don't need to go over a bunch of the procedural stuff because you know that now. The Governor submitted her application to this body to extend the disaster declaration up to and including June 27th, which would be the first 30-day extension that the LCC is being asked to grant under the new amendments to the Kansas Emergency Management Act. From the administration here today to answer questions, if necessary, we have KDHE Secretary Dr. Lee Norman, the Governor's Chief of Staff Will Lawrence, and myself. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. But if the chair will permit, I would like to turn it over to General Weisser to explain a little bit of what the emergency response looks like right now and sort of what's at stake with the governor's application today.
Yeah, we'll grant that. So
Thank you.
General Weisser, come on up. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm your Adjutant General, Major General David Weisser. It's been a bit since we've seen each other in person. You've heard me talk a lot throughout this past year. I try to save my words as to when they're important. I think it's important today. Today, we're in day number 440 in response to this public health emergency. It's critical for us to have a disaster declaration in place. Without a disaster declaration, we're very limited in our response efforts and actions that can be facilitated across the state. The disaster declaration gives us the statutory authority to activate the response and recovery aspects of the Kansas response plan. With every opportunity, I will continue to emphasize that this response has been a total team effort. We placed a high level of expectations on the entire response team for these past 440 plus days. We've been very fortunate that our employee retention rate has been high. We pushed them hard. They've stayed with us. The team extends from the local emergency managers and local health departments to nearly every state agency. This reinforces the validity of our Kansas response plan. And this public health emergency is just like any other disaster. And it started at the local level. It will end at the local level. When the local level needs a state to step in and provide support, that's when we do it. We get involved at the state level when the requirements for response exceed the capacity at the city or county level. We continue to see requests come in from across the state. The bulk of the requests this month have been for vaccine delivery, vaccination teams, personal protective equipment, and sample transport. In May, we've had 23 requests come to the State Emergency Operations Center for support. This is a significant decrease. We started this thing, we were up to 500 per month. Down to 23 is good, but that doesn't mean the emergency is over. Some of the requests that we satisfied include distributing 229 cases of PPE across the state. We transported over 250 test samples back to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment lab. We're supporting mobile vaccination clinics in various locations across the state with contract nurses and our National Guard force. Our non-congregate shelter program that we have in place is being utilized on a regular basis. Today we have 40 members, we have 40 civilians staying in non-congregate shelters across the state. Those shelters are in use in Emporia, Lansing, Gardner, Kansas City, Liberal, and Salina. We've shut down a couple across the state, but those are the ones that are still open and being utilized. State agencies that are currently mission assigned for COVID response are the Kansas Department of Health and Environment for contract nurses, Kansas Department of Transportation for signage, and a public information officer support. Kansas Highway Patrol for vaccination, site, and delivery security. Department of Children and Families to manage our non-congregate shelters. Kansas State Historical Society for facility use for a vaccination clinic, and the Kansas National Guard for a multitude of taskings. These are merely examples of what is occurring across the state today for this public health emergency. Next, I'll discuss a little bit about planning and preparing this going on. First and foremost, we're looking at distribution of vaccines and PPE. Basically, the how much, where, and how do we get it there. We're looking at future mobile vaccination sites. We had 2 sites set up this weekend, one at Lake Wilson and Lake Perry. We have since canceled those because it looks like the weather's going to preclude very much activity at the lakes. So we've turned those off. We've got one planned right now for June 4th and 5th at the Kansas Speedway. And we have several dates in June for school vaccination sites. And secondarily, we're trying to figure out how do we transition this whole thing back to local authorities. When do they no longer need the state help? So as we plan that, as a military guy, first day I show up in theater, wherever that is, what is my exit plan? How am I trying to get out? So here I am 440 days later, still trying to figure out how to get out. So again, that's part of our planning. How do I transition this back to the local communities? One important consideration for extending the emergency declaration is the federal assistance program that we are eligible for. Should we not extend the emergency, our eligibility for federal assistance may be in jeopardy. I say may because I cannot get good guidance from FEMA. One day I call FEMA, they'll tell me, no worries. The second person I call FEMA said, okay, if you end this declaration, you're telling me the disaster period is over, so you may no longer be eligible for federal dollars. So I don't have a solid answer to tell you what's going to happen with FEMA. We've been asking those questions for about a year now. I'm aware that a few states have canceled their declaration. The closest one is Oklahoma. So we called Oklahoma, said, hey, what are you guys doing? How do you figure this out? Well, the team has done some research, and what they have determined is Oklahoma has statutes that allow them to respond to this disaster without a declaration in place. I can't find any statutes that give me that authority across the state. So if you all know of any statutes that give us that authority, please let me know, because I've not been able to find it. So I would ask for your favorable consideration in extending this declaration so we continue to leverage every resource that we have available to help our fellow Kansans. Thank you for your time, and I stand for any questions you may have.
Committee of questions. Representative Finch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, General, to you and all of your staff and the folks in the Guard for the work that you've done to help Kansans throughout this pandemic.
Yes, sir, it's our privilege.
My question to you is this: on everything that you've talked about to us today that needs to continue all springs from the continued disaster declaration. Do any of those powers spring from executive orders that are currently in place?
I'd have to hear it. No is the answer. So I get my powers through statutory authorities. The executive orders are how the governor helps us in response. I'll use the license, reinstating of a licensure. So the governor determined that as we were closing things down, state agencies, people had to renew their driver's licenses. So there was an EO to help manage that. So it helps in certain respects when there's an EO. But no, I don't get my legal authority with an EO or a response.
So the critical part for you and the Guard to continue doing what you're doing is for the disaster declaration itself to continue, not necessarily the executive orders.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Further question or comments from the committee? Speaker Reichman.
Thank you, President. General, when you talk about the federal funds that may or may not be in jeopardy, I remember a year ago went through this, it seemed like we had some guidance that they wouldn't be, but now there may be some indication that there is. What kind of dollar amount are you considering? This would be at this late stage of the pandemic.
I'm not even going to hazard a guess because it will be wrong. This late in the emergency, it just really depends on what we're distributing and what we're doing for the state. Contract nurses are expensive, so we're still doing contract nursing. PPE, it was pretty cheap in 2019. Today it's not so cheap. So it really depends on how long this goes on and what the magnitude is. I can get you a better answer what our spend rate is, but I don't have a solid answer for you today, sir.
Committee, anything further? Actually, Will, do you mind coming up? I have a question for you as this pertains to this. Thank you, General.
With me?
I'm done.
All right, thank you.
So as representative for the executive branch, I've noticed today, so we had significant votes in both chambers as it pertained to UI and some of the perverse incentive for employment. Seems like there might be some nexus here. Do you know where, and I know we just passed those, but do you have any idea where the government might be on some of that? I'm trying to figure out if there's a middle ground here in the sense of getting some disaster extension minus some EO sounds like would be a good idea. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that resolution that passed our chambers today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Haven't had a chance to look at those in great detail. What I would say is I think that should be a separate discussion from this. These are, while they're certainly kind of interlocked because of the pandemic, they're very separate issues, and I would recommend we don't connect the two. Governor is having conversations. We're set to have more conversations next week on the topic, trying to find a way to address this issue. As the governor has said, understand the view of the $300 and the UI benefits and the concerns that is causing to the workforce shortage. Don't believe that's the only issue. And I think when you talk to a lot of people, we agree there's a lot of factors that are being contributed to this situation. We need to look at all of it. So the governor is looking for more information as to all of these issues and ways to address it. But it is certainly on our mind, and we're having those conversations very quickly.
Did you have any other questions, Representative Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. Will, you have known about the KEMA bill that was passed. KEMA, what was it, 40? Senate Bill 40? Senate Bill 40 passed quite a while ago. You knew that it was going to end on May 28th. I would assume your administration or the administration you work for would have done everything they could to wind down effective May 28th. Have they made any plans to stop on May 28th?
Representative Hawkins, what I would say is we're always looking for ways, as the general talked about, to start to wind things down. The reality is, in my experience, now we've gone through two of these. We had a flood in 2019. We had to extend the declaration by joint resolution of both chambers. You remember we did that through the entire year. And that continued on. The governor ultimately extinguished that towards the end of the year, but we were still hauling water to one community in Jefferson County. And we had to have the declaration to do that because the National Guard was providing that service while they were impacted because of the floods in their water sanitation system. So in this case, and in that case, every time we needed an extension, we evaluate, do we need the extension or can we ramp it down? We do the same thing for a fire when we've had plenty of wildfires this year. And we look at that and do we need to ask for an extension or do we not? And if we don't, then we wind it down. In this scenario, there really is no ability to wind these things down. It needs to continue, and that's why we're asking for the extension. Trust me, if the governor needed to wind things down right now, and we could, the governor would be doing that. There's just a lot of things that are still going on. Things are slowing down. Things are getting better. But there's still a lot of work going on. So we need to continue to move forward with these services being provided by KDM.
Certainly part of our problem is trust. The fact that we've worked together and not worked together on this issue at times. And so trust is something that we have to try to build, and it's been a difficult thing as of late, the last 6-8 months.
All right, I have Speaker Reichman and then Pro Tem Finch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the president brought up the resolutions that both bodies passed today and the $300 additional money. I think we all agree that unemployment insurance is meant to help the ones that are that need it, the ones that have lost jobs, no fault of their own, not to continue on to compete with the private sector, which it appears to be happening in Kansas. The ability, we know this is the governor's decision. Is there anything in this executive orders or anything in this resolution that grants that power? Is it outside of this scope?
With regard to UI benefits?
Yeah, making that decision to continue to 300, is anything, any of our votes, any authority of this body gives either extending or not extending, either the declaration or any of the executive orders grant her that authority to make that decision?
I don't believe so. I believe that decision is purely within her authority as the chief executive officer of the executive branch. The only thing I can think of that is currently on the books in terms of executive orders is an order related to the waiting week that has been in place for a while. And I think that's in place until it's either rescinded or the declaration expires. That's the only thing I can think of, but that is separate from the discussion going on regarding the federal benefits.
Okay, and to that point, my question, kind of along the direction that Representative Finch was going, the executive orders that are currently on the books, do you see any of those that are still needed?
I would probably defer that one to Clay Brittton, who is the author of those and works with the agencies. So Mr. Chairman, if I could defer that question to Clay.
You may. Mr. Brittton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Speaker. I was anticipating a question like that, so I brought it up on my computer here to get a list of what's still in place. These are the orders that you all would have reviewed on April 1 when Senate Bill 40 required the governor to resubmit those orders. So still in effect, we have remote notaries and witnesses. We have adult care home regulations for KDADs to deal with pandemic issues in those adult care homes and be compliant with CDC guidance. Evictions and foreclosures. We had the face coverings protocol, but that's no longer in effect. There's an adult care homes testing order that's very important in terms of how COVID testing is done in those adult care congregate living situations. A couple of orders that are more about how state agencies run their business is the driver's license order on renewing driver's licenses and the deadlines, the expiration deadlines people deal with. There's a waiting week requirement that has been waived through executive order for unemployment insurance benefits. A tax withholding executive order that is really more about the 2020 tax year, but is useful to keep on the books so that there's no confusion about people still paying their taxes for that year at this point. A tuberculosis testing executive order that changes some statutory requirements for tuberculosis testing to make them consistent with what the CDC has said about some conflicts that can happen between tuberculosis testing and COVID vaccinations. And then a rural water district meeting one that probably is maybe no longer going to be as important going forward because a lot of those meetings will have happened by now. A COVID vaccinators order that allows additional healthcare workers who are trained to inject people with things, but maybe just not specifically vaccinations to help out with the vaccination effort. And then finally, still in effect until Friday is an order on professional licenses and extending the deadlines and waiving fees to renew those licenses. That one is going back to sort of normal law on Friday when that one will expire. The rest of those are in place. There are some that probably are less important than others at this point. But that's kind of the run of the list there that are orders that are still in place that you all would have the authority to look at and review if you want through your Senate Bill 40 authority under KEMA.
Do you see any of those as still being necessary?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
See any of those orders still be needed or being necessary?
Absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, the evictions and foreclosures moratorium is still very necessary. And then we talk about those adult care homes issues with KDADs. Those are essential, I think, still to protect the safety of the residents in those adult care homes because current law regarding how you move those folks in and out of those homes and how you can do certain testing and things like that is really not appropriate for dealing with this particular pandemic still. So when we kick back into previous law on that, that's going to be a real problem, and we're not going to be in compliance with what the CDC and others have said is appropriate and safe for those situations. And then there was another one here that I think is maybe one of the more important ones. Well, COVID vaccinators, that's one that I think we continue to need because that's sort of the primary piece of what this emergency response still is and needs to be is that vaccination effort. And it makes it as easy as possible to have the right people there to be able to administer those vaccines. So those ones I think are very important and need to continue. That's part of the reason why we're here today. Although I would say the primary reason is probably really what the general was talking about in terms of the operations of KDEM and the Guard and the other mission assigned agencies doing that support work for the locals.
Pro Tem Finch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Clay. In the letter that has been submitted, and I don't know if this is a better question for you or for Mr. Lawrence, but page 2 contains 13 bullet points of consequences that will happen if the LCC doesn't extend the declaration. I just want to be clear, none of those relate to the executive orders that you just talked about with Speaker Reichman. Those are all pertaining to the declaration extension itself.
That is correct.
And just to follow up to make sure I'm clear, I understood you to say that those executive orders which you believed were important related to, most important, I don't want to put words in your mouth, related to adult care facilities, vaccinators, and then the week of unemployment benefits. And I think we might disagree on evictions and foreclosures, but those were the ones that were important. We've got the remote notary was passed in legislation this year by the legislature. According to the letter on page 3, Executive Order 2109 is supposed to be rescinded on Friday. It's going away anyway. And the water district meetings are probably already taken care of.
Mr. Speaker, Pro Tem, that is all correct, except I think that if I remember, and you can correct me because you'll know some of these plenty better than I do, I think that the statutory provision related to remote notaries and witnesses continues to say, and I may be wrong about this because it's evolved, continues to say that if there is an executive order in place that sets out sort of remote notary or witness requirements or capabilities, then the statute says that's good to go. I think that's how it works. I may very well be wrong on that. I just wanted to point that out.
Assuming it did at that point, Clay, then the statute would go into, if the executive order went away, the statute would apply at that point. And I understand that gave authority to the Secretary of State to promulgate rules and regulations to allow for remote notary and remote witnessing.
So it sounds like you know that language better than I do. And if that's the case, then you're right. The Secretary of State could then sort of take the ball at that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Committee, any further questions or comments on this? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just caution us, I know we've come a long way, it's 440 days. I think we need to be very careful and not risk KDEM's ability to get vaccinations out, especially as, we're going to be looking at vaccinating children in the near future. So I would just caution us to tie our hands when we are so close to this finish line. Thank you.
So committee hearing the discussion, and quite frankly, the first time I'm seeing the letter, we are not obligated to act on that today. Friday, I know it's just 2 days from now, but I think unless there's an overwhelming desire from the committee to act today, I will probably call a subsequent LCC meeting on Friday. Most of you could probably attend remote to look at that, so we have time to absorb this information. And with that, we could do, we're pending on 4, so that would conclude our agenda for today, because what we'll do is we'll call for Friday, and then we'll deal with 4 and 6, which is the meditation room piece, the shuffling of the space in the Capitol, and this extension. I think I'll go ahead and take that up on Friday and gives everybody time to absorb. So any objection to that or sense that we got to make it? Okay. With that, I have concluded the agenda, and seeing nothing further, we are adjourned.